Sorry to keep you all waiting. My dinner ran a little late tonight. So let's begin with some meditation. Sit with your head, neck, and trunk aligned and feel the space your body occupies. Let the rest of the day slide off and come back to the wave of breath and prana flowing from head to toe. Just watch and notice how your breath becomes smoother, longer, more subtle. Just allow that process to continue. Breathe as if your whole body is breathing. Cleansing with the exhaling breath, energizing with the inhaling breath. And notice how your body begins to surrender its tension. Feel inside the top of your head and your forehead. And then around your eyes and eyebrows. Your cheeks and the corners of your mouth. Relax the corners of your jaw, the muscles in your neck. And from your throat center, feel out along your shoulders toward your fingertips. Through your upper arms and through your forearms, your hands, your fingers, and your fingertips. Feel the wave of breath and prana as though it flows between the crown of your head and your fingertips. Relax your fingertips and feel back inside your fingers. Let go of your fingers as if they could just float away. Feel back into your hands and let your hands go. Your forearms and release your forearms. arms, your upper arms, and your shoulders. From your throat center, feel down into your chest. Relax your upper chest and upper back. Feel into the muscles in your rib cage. Relax your rib cage. And the center of your chest. It's the center of your chest. Feel down into your abdomen. Relax your navel center. Feel down into your hip joints. Your gluteal muscles. Relax your thighs. Relax your lower legs and calf muscles. Your feet and your toes. Feel the whole body breathe. The whole body at peace. And now, feel the flow of breath and prana between your navel and your nostrils. Just listen for the arising of your mantra, or your favorite divine name, or soham. That divine song, drawing your mind more and more still. You may notice the mantra become more subtle. Just follow. However the form may change, follow the presence of the mantra. other sounds may reach your ear. Just attend to the vibration of the mantra. Feel that flow along the bridge of your nose between Ajna Chakra and Nasagra. Mantra sound resonating in that space. As if all the breath and prana flowing in that space. And now, feel that flow through the left-hand channel in the left nostril, Ira, the Chandra Swara, the lunar flow. As if the entire current of breath and prana is flowing through the left nostril. And now feel that flow through the right-hand channel, Pingala in the right nostril, the solar swara. And now let go of left and right. Sink deeper between these two into the Shunya Swara. So Shumna flow in the middle space. The breath may become very subtle. Just follow the presence of the mantra. Feel the gentle vibration. Draw you towards a chamber of silent presence. Bodhicharyavatar is again. Gently rippling surface of your calm mind. Allow that sound to merge in the flow of breath from head to toe. So that the whole inner space becomes full of that sound. Keeping this awareness of breath, mind, and mantra. And your palms come to your face and your eyes gently open. Your heart filling your palms with fragrant blossoms of gratitude. offered for the well-being of all creatures, and for the presence of the Guru, coming to us at each moment with every breath we take. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Grazie, sto allora.
Right.
Buona candelora, stoma. Grazie.
Prego. We left off last week towards the end of chapter 5. Shantideva was talking about the way in which the recollection of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas keeps their presence with us, not just in the sense of remembering them, but also opening ourselves to be occupied by them, to become, as much as we can, avatars of that energy. As a way to protect against the moments when we may feel like we're falling short or don't have enough or can't quite go on. Verse 33, Shantideva says, when mindfulness is stationed as a sentinel, a guard upon the threshold of the mind, mental scrutiny is likewise present, returning when forgotten or dispersed. Talking about the importance of maintaining mindful awareness through the shamatha process of meditation, through basically the kind of meditation with a concentration focus that we use in the yoga tradition. At the outset, verse 34, when I check my mind, I find within some fault or insufficiency, I'll stay unmoving like a log in self-possession and determination. In other words, I'll sit there until I settle down. As much as we can, anyway. And to settle down without it becoming a fight to deal with restlessness or a fight to deal with drowsiness. Sometimes you may fall asleep in your meditation. It's not a good habit to have, but if you need the sleep, get the sleep. It's pretty important. Children says here, the traditional instruction for working with drowsiness is to perk ourselves up by breathing more deeply and looking slightly upward. When the mind is wild, the instruction suggests remaining in the meditation posture, but dropping the technique altogether, along with any sense of struggle. Whatever is happening with our mind, we can see it and make the necessary adjustment. Thus, we become our own meditation instructor. This is the sense of that we have used in our teaching and our teacher training in the last few years, that people, rather than doing practices, that they allow the practices to occur, that you allow the mantra to lead you into meditation rather than trying to sort of force your way in. And in that way, You let go and you make it easier for your mind to become inhabited by the stillness. Verse 35, I shall never vacantly allow my gaze to wander all about, but rather with a focused mind will always go with eyes cast down. And this is an expression of the simple attitude that we teach in silent retreats of Indriya Gupti, of protecting the senses, of keeping your awareness a little ahead of your feet as you walk, as a way to not have a mind that's wandering all over the place, particularly when you're either doing sitting meditation or walking meditation. Verse 36, but that I might relax my gaze, I'll sometimes raise my eyes and look around, and if some person stands within my sight, I'll greet him with a friendly word of welcome. It's an interesting verse, which seems to be inviting us to interrupt our practice. But it's more a practice of allowing your meditation to inhabit how you present yourself to other people in life, to let that become the face that you show to others. There are times for tight practice, she says, but there is also the need for warmth and awareness of one's environment. Shantideva instructs the monks not to be aloof. When it's appropriate to look around and be friendly, one should do just that. Our guideline is not too distracted, not too uptight. If someone along the way is wounded, you don't just walk by with downcast eyes. If a little child tickles you, you're not so serious that you can't laugh. Being awake means acting appropriately. Pretty common sense. Um, Verse 37, the four actions one by one. And when I stop to rest, I'll turn my head and look behind me, back along my path. And so I'll spy the land in front, behind, to see if I should go or else return. And thus, in every situation, I shall know my needs and act accordingly. Reminds me so much of that old Navajo blessing. Beauty before me, beauty behind me, beauty to my left, beauty to my right, beauty above and beauty below. Beauty everywhere you look and everywhere you go. Verse 39. Deciding on a given course, determining the actions of my body from time to time, I'll verify my body's actions by repeated scrutiny. I'll remain aware of my body from head to toe. You know, one of the things I noticed almost immediately when I started teaching Hatha Yoga years ago, when people would tell me, you know, gosh, what a wonderful thing that relaxation exercise is, I realized nobody feels their body. This is the first time most people were feeling their body. And so as your mindfulness grows, you inhabit your body to a greater degree. And when you inhabit your body in that way, then your movement becomes a dance. Your movement becomes beauty in motion. You know, you look at those videos of Swami Rama and how he danced around the room as he lectured. Beautiful, beautiful posture and beautiful movement. Verse 40. This mind of mine, a wild and rampant elephant, I'll tether to that sturdy post, reflection on the teaching, and I shall narrowly stand guard that it might never slip its bonds and flee. And she says in commentary here, the subject of this and the following verses is training in mindfulness of mind. The confused wild elephant of the mind is tethered with a rope of mindfulness and held fast with a hook of alertness. The sturdy post to which we tether our minds is reflection on the teaching. Well, what do you mean by reflection on the teaching? You mean thinking about the teaching? Mm-mm. No, contemplation, bhavana, we would say in yoga. This process of allowing your mind to so focus on the contemplation of the teaching that you become the teaching. It becomes your being. Um, so bhavana is this process of contemplation that takes you beyond just intellectual thinking and into actually becoming the thing that you contemplate upon. It's a way of moving towards samadhi. Remember that samadhi is really your mind totally taking the form of the object of concentration, at least in the samprajanta samadhi. And so the process of getting to that point is a process of bhavana. When I was just starting out, actually before I even met Swami Veda, I was interested in studying some of the texts of the Indian tradition and was very much taken with the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. And one day I was walking home. I lived outside the campus of the University of Minnesota, so I had a nice long half an hour, 40-minute walk back home every day. And I would go through this park every day. And in this park were a whole bunch of big, old, happy oak trees. By happy trees, I mean trees that had never been cut back. They were just sort of growing there in their full glory, and nobody had particularly bothered them all these many years, and most of them were, 100, 200 years old. Um, and as I'm walking through there one day, I thought, you know, I'm going to just stop here for a moment and gaze at this tree, and I'm going to figure out how my being and the being of this tree are the same thing. So I sat there and I sat there and I sat there. I didn't actually sit down. I was just standing there watching this tree for a long, long time. And I actually got to a point where I could feel my being and the being of that tree as the same thing. And it set off this joyfulness in my mind. It was quite wonderful. And it lasted for about 2 weeks. It was one of the sort of moments of awakening that I experienced before I even found my way to the formal practice of yoga. And I think lots of us have those kinds of experiences in our younger years. There's something that somehow caught our attention and persuaded us to focus for a time, to really focus in that sense of becoming the object of what we are contemplating. And that's really what's meant by the practice of bhavana. In the Sanskrit literature, it's often a synonym for meditation. So we tether the wild elephant of the mind to the post of mindful awareness through the breath, and that helps us to keep observation of our thoughts and emotions going. It helps us to stay in touch with feeling our body from head to toe, so we really inhabit our body. Verse 41, Shantideva says, "Those who strive to master concentration should never for an instant be distracted. They should constantly investigate themselves, examining the movements of their minds." Now, again, does this mean a lot of thinking? No, it's watching, just watching in the deepest way possible. Wondering, I think that's increasingly, I really like that as a verb for this process of focused contemplation. Just really wondering about whatever it is that you are focusing on, especially your own mind. Verse 42, in fearful situations, times of celebration, one may desist when self-survey becomes impossible, for it is taught that in times of generosity, the rules of discipline may be suspended. Shantideva is just saying, be a real person, live your life as a real person. Don't let your meditation practice overtake your ability to be with other people. And the sentence introducing verse 43 is lovely. The best advice for a new bodhisattva is to tame your mind without losing your sense of humor. Excellent advice. Excellent advice. Because if you don't learn to laugh at the absurdities that life throws at you, then you're going to cry sooner or later. Laughing is much better. And it's interesting because physiologically, laughing and crying are the same thing. The same systems are activated. The difference is that, sorry, I have a terribly runny nose all day today. The difference is that you can choose to laugh. Most of the time, you can't choose to cry, you know? It's pretty hard to say, okay, I'm going to cry now, unless you already feel it coming, of course. But you can place yourself in a frame of mind to laugh pretty easily. And as you grow spiritually, it should become easier and easier. Verse 43, when something has been planned and started on, attention should not drift to other things. With thoughts fixed on the chosen target, that and that alone should be pursued. In other words, be single-minded in what you're doing. Behaving in this way, verse 44, behaving in this way, all tasks are well performed, and nothing is achieved by doing otherwise. Afflictions, the reverse of vigilance, can never multiply if this is how you act. In other words, as it says in Bhagavad Gita, yoga karmasu kaushalam. Yoga is, and this word kaushala is just such a great word. Kushala is the word in Ayurveda for health, but it's also the word for skill and the word for beauty. So all three of those concepts are part of this notion of kaushalam. Yoga is skill and beauty and wellness in action. Verse 45, and if by chance you must take part in lengthy conversations worthlessly, or if you come upon sensational events, then cast aside delight and taste for them. That's interesting. She says here, there's a story in the biography of Trungpa Rinpoche that describes the first time he rode in a car. He was a teenager traveling in Tibet with his teacher, Khenpo Gyaltsar. The Chinese communists had been occupying the country, and the situation was very dangerous. Some people had already been put in prison. Nevertheless, the young Rinpoche was very excited at the prospect of his new adventure. Khenpo Gyaltsar, however, took this opportunity to remind him of the power of material forces. If Rinpoche lost himself now and got carried away, he warned him, he would never know what they were up against. This is the kind of wakefulness Shantideva is suggesting here, not some kind of somber rigidity. Moreover, Shantideva says, we can waste a lot of time distracting ourselves with mindless chatter. I'm reminded of a Native American man from the Taos Pueblo called Little Joe Gomez. In the early 70s, he met some people who were practicing complete silence. They were wearing chalkboards around their necks in case they needed to communicate. This got Little Joe laughing. And when someone asked him what was so funny, he said, very easy to not talk. Very difficult to talk mindfully. As far as he was concerned, the better practice was to converse consciously. Yes, I think that's probably true. As Swami Veda used to say, speak only when you're in silence. Eat only when you're fasting. Make love only when you're celibate. In other words, mind how you spend your energy. Mind how the energy is going out through your active senses into the world so that you, again, protect the energy of that, the mind and the senses, practicing Indriya Gupti with the active senses as well as with the cognitive senses. Verse 46. If you find you're grubbing in the soil or pulling up the grass or tracing idle patterns on the ground, remembering the teachings of the blissful one in fear, restrain yourself at once. In other words, watch out for getting distracted, I think. Okay. Verse 47 in the end of chapter 5. When you feel the wish to walk about or even to express yourself in speech, first examine what is in your mind, for they will act correctly who have stable minds. Be mindful. Think before you speak, and your speech will most likely come from that inner silence. When that happens, and when you have conserved the energy of your mind in its expression through the active senses, your speech has more power. Your speech has more ability to reach people and to affect them in a way that transmits some of that sense of peace and mindfulness to them. And in that way, your practice as an aspiring bodhisattva becomes medicine for them with every word you say. She's talking here about a Tibetan term, dunzi, meaning these sort of distractions that come up as we're sitting and doing our meditation. You've decided to meditate for 45 minutes and you're 15 minutes into your sitting. Suddenly you remember some important thing you must do. Dunzi has entered the picture. If you fail to acknowledge that tug as just a tug, or the thought as just thinking, you'll find yourself watering the plants or checking your email or looking at your phone. Instead, the initial urge to walk about or phone someone can be simply acknowledged without praise or blame. You can touch these thoughts, let them go, and come back to taming your mind. This is a lot like the way that Swami Rama used to talk about having a conversation with your mind before you sit down to meditate, so that you can anticipate some of these things that may come up and become potential distractions. And you can decide in an orderly fashion before you even sit down and try to meditate how to respond to those when you're done. You commit to those action items, dismiss the rest, and chances are your mind will leave you alone for for a while as you try to sit there quietly. Questions or comments so far? We've gone to chapter 4. Hurrah. You haven't taken a look at the chat box. Okay, good. So we move into chapter 6, which children entitles Vigilance Part 2. She says, Chapter 5 of The Way of the Bodhisattva continues with a section on the three disciplines: not causing harm, gathering virtue, and benefiting others. The first discipline, not causing harm, is introduced in verses. Oh, this is the second half of chapter 5. I get it. Uh, so not causing harm is introduced in verses 48 to 54. This is the most fundamental instruction in not making a mess of things. So verse 48. When the urge arises in the mind to feelings of desire or wrathful hate, do not act, be silent, do not speak, and like a log of wood, be sure to stay. This is something that I would hope that our demonstrators here in Minneapolis remember as we go through these trying moments. They actually had quite a wonderful demonstration last weekend. Several thousand people gathered outside the hotel where the immigration goons were staying. And rather than just try to rattle them by making a lot of noise, which they have been doing for several nights, and this even extended to breaking the windows of the hotels and covering them with graffiti, spray painted graffiti. So those people all got arrested, and they should have been arrested. But what's happened in the last day or so is that huge crowds of people in the thousands have gathered outside these hotels singing, just singing songs. And I mean, one of the songs is, "You can change your mind." You know, you don't have to do this terrible stuff. Um, Obviously, their songs are designed to persuade, but it's a much gentler way to make the point. And it's not something that is simply aimed at disrupting their ability to rest. You know, if you think about it for a minute, if you've got a bunch of goons who are intent on causing all kinds of mayhem and you deny them the sleep that they need, how much more violence are they going to perpetrate on the crowd? You really want those people to get their rest, you know, so that they can keep their balance as they are doing what they're trying to do and be less violent about it. Um, and so I think when people are getting too worked up, it's really important to step away and take a breath and do some practice and just kind of get your balance, get your feet on the ground again. Because it's too easy when you lose your balance to get caught up in something that could result in serious harm or even, God forbid, your death. And nobody wants that. Verse 49, when the mind is wild with mockery and filled with pride and haughty arrogance, and when you want to show the hidden faults of others to bring up old dissensions or act deceitfully, and when you want to fish for praise or criticize and spoil another's name or use harsh language sparring for a fight, it's then that like a log you should remain. That's pretty obvious, I think. Um, it's just too easy to get carried away in an emotionally charged situation and to say things that you later regret or need in some way to make amends for. And the more we cultivate this habit of mindful awareness, the more we're going to be able to see those thoughts arising before they gain a lot of momentum in your mind. And that is very powerful because it gives you much more control over your behavior and much more ability to think about what's going to be skillful in this situation. The thing that's been wonderful on the whole about people's response to this terrible stuff that's going on in my city is that for the most part, that's what people have done. They have simply been there witnessing, which actually, without doing anything else, without even pulling out your phone and making a video, that's enough to hold up a mirror to the cruelty of the situation. The videos have proven to be quite important in ascertaining the truth of what happens in these situations. Yeah, she goes on at some length here about the whole process of this chain of thoughts and emotions that leads up to our impulses to act and intervening at each stage in the process, the earlier the better. The basic message, she says, is this: instead of turning up the heat and bringing your emotions to a boil, add some cool, refreshing water to the mix, and the Shenpa charge will subside. De-escalation, to put it in common police parlance, you know, being able to say, for example, being able to crack a joke at the right moment so that people have no choice but to laugh. And if you laugh together, you join together. It's such an important skill. Somebody who can diffuse a situation with humor has learned how to connect with people. I've often told a story of a therapy client I worked with who had a terrible history of sexual abuse by his father and his elder brother, both of whom committed suicide, and both of whose bodies he discovered, among other things that happened in his life, like the murder of his partner recently. And because of all of the trauma that he lived with in his life, the only response he could come up with, his first response, was always rage. And it made him feel powerful. You know, when people are grieving, a lot of times they get really angry because it feels powerful. It's one of the only ways to feel a sense of power sometimes when you're facing a loss. So he would have these terrible rages and he would call me up and he'd say, I got to see you in a day or two. So I knew that when he came to see me, he was going to scream at me for an hour, for half an hour. But then, predictably, and this happened every single time we talked, at about that half an hour point, he would start to transmute what was going on into humor. He would start making a joke out of whatever it was we were talking about. And by the end of the session, we were always laughing our heads off. Every single time this happened. It was remarkable to watch. But he kept it up for, gosh, he kept it up for years. It was very hard for him to let go of that way of being in the world. So he's constantly getting into big fights with people in his family about politics and, you know, Trump and all the rest of it. And it's kind of miserable. And his family, I got to give a lot of credit to his family because they didn't run away. They stayed with him in the midst of all of this. And when his partner was killed, they were right there for him. It was kind of surprising to see, given all the stuff that had gone on between them. And then at a certain point, when I brought him into the meditation center one day for the first time, he came to the door in the usual blinding rage. And he walked in and he looked around and he said, what is this place? He was infused by the energy that Baba left in that room. And within 3 or 4 sessions meeting at the center, he completely changed his tune. He came in one day and he said, you know, my partner was very devoted to St. Francis, and he loved living by the rule and the prayer of St. Francis. And I think if I want to honor my partner, I should do the same. I need to stop all this rage stuff. I never said stop the rage to him, you know, because he needed to come to that himself, which he did. I was absolutely surprised. I didn't think it would ever happen, but it did. Very miraculous. And it turned his life so completely. He actually created a musical review about the murder of his partner, which he plays all over the place to raise funds to help nonprofit organizations that help mentally ill people not fall through the cracks, which is basically how the person murdered his partner. And now he's remarried, very happy, very cheerful person. You wouldn't guess it was the same person that I knew 5 years ago. It's amazing. So being able to catch those moments of emotionality arising in your mind and just look at them with a still mind, to note for them what they are, even just that much, interrupts the automatic momentum of these things falling into our behavior and allows us to make some kind of a more skillful response. And maybe even in the best of all circumstances, to be able to make a humorous response that diffuses the tension for everybody. 51. And when you yearn for wealth, attention, fame, a circle of admirers serving you, and when you look for honors, recognition, it's then that like a log you should remain. That's pretty obvious, I think. And when you want to do, and when you want to do another down and cultivate advantage for yourself, and when the wish to gossip comes to you, it's then that like a log you should remain. Impatience, indolence, faint-heartedness, and likewise haughty speech and insolence, attachment to your side, when these arise, it's then that like a log you should remain. In a way, Shantideva is sort of going through the whole list of antarayas in Sutra 31 in chapter 1 of the Yoga Sutras. There's this list of obstacles called the antarayas. And it's like he's going through a lot of these one by one here in these verses. How to catch yourself when those things are starting to get control of your behavior. Verse 54, examine thus yourself from every side. Note harmful thoughts and every futile striving. Thus it is that heroes on the bodhisattva path apply the remedies to keep a steady mind. Now notice, he's not talking about criticizing yourself. He's not talking about being angry at yourself for having the thoughts you have. It's very important. It's just noticing. It's just seeing what is there. And this is one of the important gifts that mindfulness gives, the sense of acceptance of whatever is in your mind. If you can accept what's there, even if it's something you don't like or you don't want, then you have a starting point for doing something about it. Without that acceptance, there's no starting point. And that's one of the reasons why self-criticism is so ineffective with people. It just helps people feel bad. And that's not helpful. It doesn't give them anything to improve their situation. But if you can simply notice these things and, keep a mental list. Swami Veda used to keep a list of his so-called enemies, number one of which was anger when he was a boy. And he kept that journal for many, many years. And he did an incredible job of conquering that anger, as we know from his sweet and benevolent presence that helped us all feel better when we came into his physical presence.
Stomaji, can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Um, that makes me think of something I read from Swami Veda, but I can't fully remember it. And I hope that you'll be able to remember it. It's a silence practice called maybe Hitam Sutam, and there was a third word.
Oh, I think he's referring to Hitta Mitta Priya,
Hitamita Priya.
the rules for speech. Hitta, beneficial, Mitta, measured, Priya, loving. You know, I got into I was at a conference a couple years ago. Probably told this story before, but I'll tell it again. I was at this conference at the University of Delhi. My friend Sunit Varma was the director of the Indian psychology program there, and they were having a conference to celebrate the 20th anniversary of this academic department. Indian psychology is actually, in terms of the history of academic institutions, it's a relatively new discipline, even though it relies on all these ancient texts and traditions. And the conference was being paid for actually by an activist from the United States named uh, Rajiv Malhotra. And Rajiv is an interesting guy. He started out, he's an American tech billionaire who sold his business and decided to make a career of confronting Western academic institutions with their misunderstandings of Indian culture. And he did a great job of this for quite a long time. I met him at a Vedanta conference years ago, like around 2000. Um, and he was doing wonderful work at that point. Um, these days, he's gotten to be kind of a Hindu fundamentalist. He's sort of buying the BJP line. And he's got some academic disciples, Indian American professors in American universities, who are intent on decolonizing Indian culture. And this is this is where the progressive left in America in academia is kind of running wild at the moment, unfortunately. So we get into a discussion. I had invited two Christian theologians, Indian Christian theologians. I suggested that Sunit invite them to the conference because I had met them a few weeks before. They had come to a seminar at our ashram and did a lovely presentations. One of them was a Jesuit priest who had a beautiful way of combining Christian prayer practices with the solar salutation. And the other one is a theologian who actually has spent most of his career teaching at Harvard in the United States, but he's actually from South India. So my Jesuit friend gets up and he starts doing his presentation about this Christian prayer practice. And these Indian American professors start needling him with all kinds of hostile questions. And finally, they said to him, we don't really care if you answer these questions or not. We just want you to sit down and get out of here because you're a Christian and your Christian agenda is just to convert people to Christianity, and that's colonizing Indian culture, basically was what they were saying, which isn't at all what they were doing. The Catholic order that he belongs to gave up seeking conversions a long time ago in India. They don't do it. They don't do it anymore. That's for the Protestants. Um, so finally, my Jesuit friend, after listening to this stuff for quite a while, got kind of firm with them and he said, "Now listen here. My people have been in this country for 2,000 years. My Christian people have been in this country for 2,000 years. I'm just as Indian as you are, and I belong here." He really claimed his place. And that's absolutely right in terms of the pluralism of Indian culture. And they were getting so heated with each other I wanted to sort of be Swami Veda and stand up and say, please, people, hitta metta priya, you know, kindness. The Indian way in scholarship is not that you argue until somebody convinces you that you're right. That's a Western thing. We're all into persuasion in Western intellectual discourse. In India, you take the other person's point of view and you go live it yourself for a while. And then you figure out whether it's the right way or not. You make your opinion based on an actual experiment, an actual experience, and you don't engage in these hostile debates back and forth. But I'm the white guy. I can't say those things in this context. If I stand up and say that, I'm going to get all this colonization crap from them, even though I am speaking a traditional Indian point of view. So I'm sitting there kind of going, oh my God, what do I do? And I'm looking at two or three people in the audience who understood my conundrum, and all I could do was just sit there and be quiet. It was so interesting to watch this happening. Um, so yeah, it's a good rule for any time that you have to have a conversation, especially one that involves some strong emotion. Um, and if you can't keep to those principles, then it's a good idea to discontinue the conversation for the moment, sort of both go your separate ways until you can get your feet on the ground and then come back to it. And it's not a bad idea to have an appointed time to do that. I often used to suggest this to couples where there was a lot of domestic violence that would come out of these verbal arguments. And I would suggest to them that, you need to have a signal between the two of you when things are getting too hot so that you can stop and agree to part company for a little while, calm down and cool off until you can come back and talk to each other in a way that can solve the problem. So, yeah, those are the three principles. Hitta, beneficial; mitta, measured; priya, loving. And loving doesn't mean just Swami, sweetie, sweetie, but it does mean respectful. I think that's probably, in a way, a better word to use. Really taking people seriously. Now, there's lots of discussion that goes on in America these days about how hard it is for people to talk to each other about their differences. And one of the problems that you encounter immediately is that people in the US so often, when they're having a conversation with somebody, when they're not talking, they're waiting for a chance to say the next thing they want to say. They are not listening to the other person. And if it's an angry interchange, the other person is looking for how to get out. They're looking for where's the door. They're not listening to what you have to say. So it's really important to be able to say things in a respectful enough tone of voice, even if it's kind of firm, that people can really hear you. And the way Swami Veda used to do this is he would just get very quiet and very personal. Those were the moments when he would be talking about something he wanted me to do, and he'd give me that look and he'd say, Stoma, if I can do it, you can do it. And that was very persuasive, I have to say. So hitta mitta priya. I trust that answers your question, Christian, right?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. 54. Examine thus yourself from we did this one. Note harmful thoughts and every futile striving. Thus it is that heroes in the bodhisattva path apply the remedies to keep a steady mind. That's exactly what we were just talking about. We were actually out of ourselves here. With perfect and unyielding faith, with steadfastness, respect, and courtesy, with modesty and conscientiousness, work calmly for the happiness of others. What a great summary. What a wonderful summary. It reminds me of the story of Buddha when he went begging and the lady put some of her baby's feces in his begging bowl. And the disciple Ananda was so pissed off at the disrespect shown his teacher. And Buddha said, Ananda, stop. If somebody gives you something you don't need, just say, thank you, I don't need this. And move on. And that's what he did. Very respectful. It was also firm at the same time. And people can take that kind of firm feedback if it's done with respect. There's this difference linguistically between the term expect, which means to look out. It's one directional. Your expectation of another is your own expectation for that person. If there's respect in the relationship, somebody is looking back at you. That's what respect means. You really see each other. This phrase, I see you, has become very popular in recent years, and that's the sort of thing that they're talking about. And so I think in commentary that Chudrin makes here, the most important point is about the value of modesty and humility in everything you do. Staying with the facts, being respectful, being firm. You need to hold a boundary with bad behavior, but not being mean about it. And I think that was always something that really impressed me about Swami Veda in particular. When he had a weighty topic to discuss with somebody, nearly the first thing he would say is, now you have to make up your own mind about this. And then he'd lay out some things to consider.
You're muted, Stomach.
Not only did it cut me out, it shut me off. Um, so we were talking about this attitude of respect, and of making sure that you are really listening to the person that you're communicating with. That's so important. If you may not agree with the person that you're talking to, but rather than focusing on talking about your differences, focus instead on having a sense of curiosity about how did you come to believe that? You know? And if you take that sort of attitude, people are more than willing to talk about their journey of coming to whatever belief they have. That may easily open up area for common ground between the two of you that you can use. I've been working at this with I have a youngest brother who is an absolute mega guy. He has been a Rush. Lots of you in the United States will recognize the name of Rush Limbaugh, the right-wing radio guy. And he was a big Rush Limbaugh fan, real libertarian kind of, not even really a conservative in the classical sense. And a lot of members of my family find it very hard to talk to him. But he and I actually have a very sweet relationship with each other. Among other things, he used to be a radio personality And now in retirement, he's making his living reading audiobooks and he's trying to get me to do the same thing, which I actually would actually like to do. I think it would be really fun. So we have some common things we can talk about without spending time dwelling on the things we differ. We know very well what those are. And if we start to stray into that territory with each other, we have a rule that we stop and say, are we going to continue talking about this? You know, most of the time, no, we're not. Most of the time, we're going to stay with the area where we have some common ground. But every once in a while, we'll say, well, yeah, okay, let's do it. And those conversations have typically been quite productive. And in taking that attitude of curiosity towards what brought him to those points of view, among other things, I learned that he and his wife met because they both felt like conservative outliers in the families they grew up in. You know, I didn't feel a part of the family because I was gay. My little brother didn't feel part of the family because he was so conservative. And so we all had our own reasons for feeling like Martians in the families we grew up in. And understanding that part helped me understand, among other things, how my brother found his wife and what the bond is between the two of them. And that gives me some useful intelligence in being able to maneuver the relationship. I don't have quite the same connection with his wife, but that's we both are cooks, so that's how she and I communicate is by talking about cooking and baking. Um, so taking that attitude of curious interest towards people, I think, is so helpful in getting around the pitfalls of some of this difficult communication that happens these days between people with very different beliefs. And I used to do this with therapy clients as well. In the beginning of therapy, I would often encourage them to take an attitude of curious interest towards what goes on in your mind. It's a very gentle sort of invitation to this kind of mindful awareness we've been talking about, to be curious about what goes on in the moments before you speak or act. Verse 57, Shantideva says, when doing virtuous acts beyond reproach, to help ourselves or for the sake of others, let us always bear in mind the thought that we are selfless, like an apparition. It's a really interesting thought. I've been working on completing the discussion section of some of these sutras in chapter 4 of the Yoga Sutras. And I came across today a part of one of Swami Veda's lectures where he was talking about the difference between being selfless, in other words, being generous, doing things for the benefit of others, but that's not renunciation. You're still trying to get something. You're trying to get a good karma by being generous. It will say, oh, God provides. Doesn't even enter their mind to think of themselves as them doing anything in that situation. So that's what Shantideva is getting at here by becoming an apparition.
Can I ask a
This,
question about that? Sorry to interrupt again.
sure. Go ahead.
So that comment, it's so interesting because we use it, at least when I think of myself, I can use the positive feeling of service to others as a sort of like signal of being on the right track, let's say. But I have definitely asked myself at times, oh, but like what, like I wonder if there's a place in which the right action is not necessarily the I sometimes struggle with ahimsa and this and selflessness in the sense that can I be saying something that is actually hurting your feelings or really making you question yourself to a degree that may dysregulate you even, and yet that's what needs to be said.
Well, I mean, selflessness is still a good thing, and generosity is a good thing. It increases the sattva in your mind. It increases the peacefulness and the sense of balance and purity in your mind. And that helps you to thin down the painful influence of the kleshas. It's part of this process that Patanjali refers to as klesha tanukarana, thinning down, attenuating the afflicted vrittis of the mind. So that's all to the good, but it isn't the ultimate goal. You can't obtain realization by becoming a good person. You know, if you're clinging to goodness, you're still stuck in the gunas. You know, this is why some tantric masters will send people out on a street corner to throw rocks at people or to do other nasty things because their sense of goodness is unbalanced and they need to learn to be bad. So eventually you have to give up even sattva. And, it becomes a matter of saying, I have no idea how that happened, but I'm sure glad it did. You know, I'm sure you can think of some moments in your clinical life that have been like that with clients. And that's the difference between goodness and generosity and genuine renunciation. Yeah, renunciation is not easy. It's tough because you have to give up your sense of goodness. I grew up being a good boy. Man, was I a good boy. I was one of those people who was too good for my own good. And I had to go learn to be bad. In fact, my therapist used to reward me for misbehavior. Um,
I think, Stomaji, there's just one thing to
sure.
continue on this. I know it's almost time. There's a conflict here between hitam mitam priyam and sometimes being bad to make the point. So that choice of am I still following saying the right thing at the right time so the other person can hear, or saying what needs to be said because it's so I don't know, I'm finding a little conflict there.
Most of the time you can find a way to see what needs to be said in a respectful fashion. Now, Swami Rama was really good at some of the disrespectful ways of doing that. And, he would tell people's personal business in a crowd. He would lie about other people in a crowd. He would do all kinds of these things that we would otherwise consider possibly to be violent. But once you know the backstory of all those situations, you can see how he was saying what needed to be said about something. He was capable of acting skillfully at a level that people didn't understand. And most of the time, we're actually, frankly, afraid of. Ushu said when they were in the ashram, if they saw Swami Rama coming, they'd all run the other way because he was a fire. And um, and I've often said my biggest regret is that I was never strong enough to withstand the fire. So he was very nice to me, unfortunately. It's too bad my guru was so nice to me. He never rubbed me while he was in the body. There's been some friction since then, but does that answer the question, Sunita?
Yes, yeah.
Well, let's keep wondering about it because I'm sure this is going to come up as we continue next time. Okay? Good. Well, we've run just a tad over here, but we've actually run over just exactly the same amount that I was late. So thank you for your patience. And let's just sit with that beautiful feeling, that feeling of calm. Let the stillness come back. And in that stillness, let's feel each other's presence as that one light. For the next 2 minutes. Om Tat Sat. Brahmarpanamastu. Om Shanti. 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 Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week. I won't be late. Take care, everyone. Have a lovely week.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Night.
Swamiji.